Robert from SGNR Photo, and today I'm going to go through a sample edit of a photo I took not too long ago during an indoor studio session. The subject of my photo is Alicia. She's a petite model of in the Ottawa area, and what I was going for here was what I see as a photographer while all the studio lights are on and I'm getting ready to take my first picture. So what I did was intentionally included some of the background elements of the studio, which you'll see over here on the left and right. And there's a little bit too much, so the first thing I'm going to start off with is I'm going to start off by cropping this image. And I'm going to crop it to an 8:10 aspect ratio. 8:10 is probably my choice for when I want a nice landscape photo, but without too many elements off to the side. If I'm not cropping in 8:10, I'm usually going to crop in something like a 16:9, almost like a cinema aspect ratio. So I'm just going to go ahead and set it to 8:10, which you can see in the cropping square, and I'm going to shrink this down a little. There's still a little bit too much stuff on the floor, too much stuff on the sides. We're going to bring this in a little. And we're going to adjust it just about like that. That looks pretty good. And we're going to hit enter just to complete the crop. So I've gotten rid of a lot of the extra bits along the side. While I like having some of the studio stuff showing, I don't want it to be a major distraction from Alicia, who is the subject of the photo. The next thing we're going to go through is we're going to go through some of the contrast and color. Straight out of the camera, the raw file is pretty dull. It lacks contrast. The colors are desaturated, so it doesn't look the most visually appealing. So we're going to go and tackle the colors and contrasts first. And what I like to do in cases like this is go through my presets. My presets along the side here in Lightroom. And the one that I found worked the best is one called Old Polar, which is meant to resemble an old Polaroid photo, oddly enough. And so by clicking on that, the contrast is pumped up, the colors are pumped up a bit. And also, if you've ever seen an old Polaroid photo, you'll know that whenever you look at the highlights, they're a little yellowy. The shadows take on kind of a bluish tinge. And it kind of simulates a little bit of the morning light look that I was going for on this photo. As you can see, there's kind of like light seeping in, through like an open studio door, casting shadows here in the background, etc. So we're going to keep with that theme. So right off the bat, the preset's not too bad, but it could be better. There are some things that I'm not particularly fond of, and we're going to correct that. Presets in your image editors are a great launching point. Don't feel that you have to stick with them. I usually use them as a starting point, a jumping off point, and I move from there. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm actually going to pump up the contrast a little bit more. I want the shadows to be deeper, I want the highlights to be brighter, the midtones to have more punch, and you can see right away that makes a huge change. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to start making more localized adjustments to things. The first one that I'm going to do, I'm going to add a little bit of a vignette around the edges, because the edges are still a little bit too sharp, still a little bit too in focus, or at least too bright for my liking. And we're going to bring that down and bring that down. As you can see, we're bringing more of the focus to the subject of the photo and a little bit less to the periphery, which is exactly what I'm looking for. So that looks pretty good. We're doing well with this, but there are some things that I'm still not particularly fond of. There's still a little bit too much in the highlights. And I'm going to come up here. I'm going to bring the highlights down a little bit more. And I'm also going to bring down the exposure a little bit. It's a little bit overexposed, not terribly so, maybe about a quarter of a stop, which, that kind of fine-tuning you don't really get in camera globally. So I'm going to bring that down as well. I am going to maybe push the brightness in the highlights, or not the highlights, but the whites up a little bit. So skin tones will have a little bit more edge to them. But it won't affect the shadow areas as much. So it's not like a global adjustment with your exposure. The next thing I'm going to do, because this Polaroid preset sets up what's called a split tone, what it does is it takes your shadows and imparts, as you can see, a cool tone, like a bluish tone here that it adds to the shadow areas. It adds a warmer tone to the highlights. Right now it still looks a little bit too cool. There's a little bit too much blue in here. I'm going to bias it a little bit more toward the highlights. Maybe not quite that much, but right about there is pretty good. And things are looking good so far. I really like this. So what I have now is I have sort of this yellowish tone in the lights, sort of like those incandescent bulbs that you would get when you are shooting with studio lights. There's modeling lights that sort of show you where your shadows are going to fall before you take your picture. You get kind of that warmish tone of the light that's seeping in from both, off to the camera right. Things are looking pretty good. The only thing I'm not terribly happy with right now, well, there's two things. One is Alicia's face is a little bit too dark compared to the rest of her skin tones. Her eyes are almost completely in shadow. We're going to fix that first, and then we're going to get to our final thing. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to zoom in, and by zooming in, I get a nice framing. I get to see exactly what I'm doing. And I'm going to take a local adjustment brush, and I'm just going to paint in some light. I'm taking this exposure value, and this will raise the exposure level just where I'm painting. So I'm just going to paint in some additional light into the hair, onto the face, and you can see it immediately, a huge improvement. And of course, because we have the split toning going on, all of the toning aspects take over as well. So the highlights are getting that more buttery yellowy tone added to it, and the shadow areas are getting that bluish tone to it as well. I'm just going to move along the hand, and as we zoom out from this, we're going to see that immediately the tones match much better between the face and the shoulder, the face and the arm, the legs, etc. And also, we can see her eyes, which is pretty important. The next thing that bothers me in terms of this photo is I don't like this here. I don't like this drain that's in the floor. Normally I would place my subject a little bit more over to the right in terms of the camera placement, so that way this didn't happen. But what I'll do is, it's just a quick fix. I'm going to take my spot removal tool, and I'm just going to make it large enough to frame what it is that I want to remove, and click on it, and Lightroom will pick something similar in terms of tone for me to use to hide this. I'm just going to pull from a slightly different area, and when I turn that off, the edit's pretty seamless. You don't really notice it, especially when you zoom out. If you didn't see me doing it, you probably wouldn't have known that there was a drain there that I'd removed. The next thing is this faint bit of an electrical outlet, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to shrink it down so it's just large enough to fit, and I'm just going to go over here, pull this closer, and like so. And again, pretty seamless edit, and when you zoom out, completely unnoticeable. If you were to print this image up as an 8x10 or a 16x20, you wouldn't notice this edit at all. So that's pretty much it. And so what we've gone ahead and done is we've taken an image from this, which is our original image out of the camera, after we cropped it, to this, which has more punch, more visual appeal, and overall is a much more appealing photo, in my opinion. And that is our edit. If you like these videos, please let me know. I will be making more if people want to see what kind of processes I go through. And thank you very much for watching.